Hello people of the internet, it's Amanda, and if you're new here on my channel, I usually talk about Japanese movies, dramas, entertainment. Sometimes I tap into other Asian pop culture topics as well, but lately I've only been yapping about number I here on my channel, and it's because I've just been so awfully busy about so many different things that the only thing I can focus on at the moment, hobby-wise, is number I. I mean, I have been watching some dramas here and there during my free time, but I haven't been able to like sit down and make a review of them or anything like that because I'm just not in that mindset to to do those things. But if you're interested in my thoughts about current dramas that I'm watching or anything like that that is outside of YouTube, I usually post stuff on the community tab of this channel or my Facebook page or my Twitter account. And if you just want more of me sharing some lifestyle stuff like what I've been up to and all those other things, there's my Instagram for that. So same username as this one. You can see like all of them over here. But yeah, I'm always open for a chat in those different platforms if I'm not making videos on here. But I'll try as much as possible to still keep filming content whenever I have something that I feel like sitting down and just talking about and all those other stuff, which is usually the case when it comes to number I related things. Now, I have a different type of content planned out for today, but because of certain delays, I'm not able to film that. So in light of release day for God I EP, I'm just going to talk about my impressions of the song from this particular release by number I instead. With that said, let's just get to it. I've made particular videos about God I as a single as well as HIRAKEGOMA when they released those. So I'll be putting links to those down in the description. I wouldn't talk about those two songs in particular in this video and focus more on the B-sides that are newly released. Because again, as I mentioned, there are specific videos for those two songs. You can check out my interpretation and my other thoughts on them in those videos. But for these ones, so they kind of like teased these songs a couple of days before the actual release on different kind of like radio shows. So I was able to hear it prior to the release today. And I've already formed some impressions, opinions on them upon listening to it though, like a couple of days ago. But now, having been able to like listen to it on loop and look at the lyrics and stuff like that. So I've finally formed more kind of like solid opinions about each of them, as well as interpretations, thoughts, all of those. So we are going to run through each and every track. Now, I wouldn't play each track because again, copyright stuff, but I will just focus more on kind of like each of the tracks as it is, my thoughts on them in terms of lyricism, in terms of just the rhythm, everything. So that's what we're going to do. Again, after, in terms of the track list, so I'll go at it one by one with omitting God I and HIRAKEGOMA, which is the first track and the last track for this particular release. So with that said, we're going to start off with Romi-Julie or Romeo and Juliet, which was produced by Jin. So again, as with any number I release, they take turns in terms of producing songs, whatever. For this particular EP, a lot of the songs were produced by Kishi and then a couple by Jin, and then there's one particular song that was produced by Shaw, so we're just gonna run through them. But anyways, yeah, so Romi-Julie or Romeo and Juliet, this song reminded me so much that Jin is a Swiftie. More so than him taking inspiration from the Shakespearean, play, but it just reminded me so much that Jin is a Swiftie simply because of like how it is with Taylor Swift's love story. But what's interesting about this is as compared to Taylor Swift's love story, where it's more whimsical, a bit naive, there's a fairy tale-esque twist to it, a happy ending. It's like a Disney-fied version of the original Shakespearean play. With Jin's Romi-Julie, it's kind of like more again, it follows more of that Shakespearean material tone to it, where it is kind of like describing this relationship that is somewhat complex. There's a little bit of like twistedness to it, but in a sense, it's like it's all or nothing type of thing, dressed up in this very colorful like track or kind of like harmony or music. And I was expecting this song to be a ballad when I saw like the title initially. So I was kind of like surprised that it wasn't a ballad. It was really more of like this kind of like perky, with still touches of rap in it and all these other things, kind of track that kind of like distracts you away from how melancholic some of the lyrics are. Now, I'm not advocating, how romanticizing toxic relationships and all these other things, but for the intents and purposes of the song, it really kind of like adds that element of, if it's either we go together or not, let's just end it here, all these other things, these unspoken feelings of being unsure of, it kind of plays into the narrative of, say, Blow Your Cover or Eily, where you don't really like, the more that you like or fall in love with this person, the more that you're unsure of what to say or what to do or how to express it, or like how it is exactly to communicate. And there's like a couple of things in the lyrics that stood out to me. Like, I have notes right here because I am taking this a bit seriously as it is. Like, for example, this asakara korombo patsu yoru ni wa nigetteru 58 yappa suki kamo toka toka, which, like, to me, rougher translation would be more like you start arguing the first thing in the morning, by night I'm gripping, which is very, very kind of like vivid in a sense, but still thinking maybe I like you or whatever. It's kind of like giving this nonchalance of having so much strong emotion towards this other person, but you're still trying to kind of like figure out what exactly you are to each other. And to me, it also kind of like relates to the volatility of their relationship with their fans, in a sense, where sometimes there are just things that are being demanded off of you as an artist, and for some reason, like, you wanting to expect something from the audience that you want to reach to, and there's kind of like this disconnect, but at the end of the day, you still want to have that connection and that relationship with them, and it kind of like is like playing into that metaphor as well. And again, not to romanticize, the toxicity in terms of relationships and stuff like that. I think this is more of like a metaphorical sense of this push and pull of relationships, whether or not it's romantic or relationships between the artist and a fan. And it's kind of like, the more that you want to appease to this person, the more that you don't know what to do, or it's kind of like, are you allowing yourself to lose yourself into this entire narrative, or whether or not they would come with you where you would want to head next, or something like that. And I think it's such an interesting play into the idea of Romeo and Juliet as well, because even if like a lot of stories reference this as an epic love story, looking back at its origin, Romeo and Juliet barely knew each other. Romeo was pretty much like still hung up on Rosalie, which is his former lover, and it's kind of like just this whirlwind type of romance that takes you into spontaneity and ends into the tragedy that it is. And it's just kind of like, again, describes this whole new complicated, complex relationship that is transformed into kind of like a metaphor for this song. And I don't know, but I just find it really interesting. And again, with Jin, there's this trend of just playing into these types of kind of like metaphor or parallels into relationships, and conveying a message through that is kind of like two-sided, if you will. So Yeah, there's also this line in the song, like, I'm a bird, I'm a nerd, and I don't know why, but it reminds me so much of The Notebook. Like, there's this line, like, one of the memorable lines from that movie and the book is, if you're a bird, then I'm a bird. And again, if you look at that particular story, there is that level of just contrast between the two characters, which, but at the end of the day, they still chose to be each other and be each other's epic love. And I guess, and again, take what you will from that story, whether you like it or not, but again, it conveys that kind of message of how relationships are complex, and sometimes you have to go at it all or nothing or whatever. And I don't know, but it's just so interesting to me that I expected this song to be a ballad, and then it wasn't. So you kind of like can vibe to it in a way, but listening deeper into the lyrics, and you would be like, ah, okay, there's something edgy about this, there's something that kind of like snaps in this, in terms of the perception of love, or being with someone, or expressing that kind of emotion towards someone. And that makes for a very interesting track. And this probably isn't my favorite track from this entire list, but it's not to say that I completely am skipping it whenever I'm listening to it, because there are some songs which makes me do that. But for this entire EP, even if Romy Julie isn't exactly my favorite, I still kind of like love vibing to it. So that's saying something. Okay, next song is this song. This song is the epitome of don't judge a book by its cover, for this particular EP. And I say that because when I first saw the title of this and saw that this was the only song that Shaw produced for this single, I was like, what is this title? What is I Dog? And it kind of like gives you an immediate clue as to what the song was gonna be like, and to some extent, like, I kind of guess that it will be a play. It will have some kind of like play with the lead track God Eye. But I was just curious, like, would it be just lyrics, or what will this song be about? And so when I heard it, it was interesting because Shaw explained this in like when they played it for the first time on the radio, that he was kind of like playing with the backtrack, or like just the like with God Eye in general, and this like played around reversing it, all these other things, and that's why the backtrack ended up as a reversed version of God Eye. But in terms of the lyrics, the messaging of God Eye and I Dog is pretty much the same. It's just that I Dog is a bit more kind of like straightforward, harsh in a sense, and aggressive, because God Eye, as aggressive as it has a bit more of like that positive tone to it, of having agency over your own life and taking control over the narrative and shaping your own destiny. Whereas for iDog, it kind of like plays into the frustration and the emotion that was behind the thought process of God Eye. There are a lot of really pointed lines in this song where, it talks about frustrated feelings of things that are left unfinished, going back to certain moments and feeling lost and going back to square one. And there are certain lines here, like for example, aitsu no inu ni narezu ote to mate de endo, which to me, like roughly translating it is, I couldn't be their dog obeying to shake or sit or stay, which are common, commands if you're training your dog. So it ends, which is kind of like an interpretation of saying that you couldn't be anybody's lap, like the person singing it couldn't be anybody's lap dog, just obeying these common like things, and so it had to end whatever the situation was. And there's also another line here which kind of like talks about like how you're at the end of your life gauge, or more of like your internal meter in a sense. But you have to nod along and say okay, or conform to certain things that are being thrown at you, because that's like the status quo. And it's so interesting like hearing those things, because again, usually they play around with like certain things, talking about situations and being freer and stuff like that, but never as pointed and as aggressive as this, especially if you're familiar with Number I's history, which I wouldn't dive deep into because I've talked about those in a lot of past videos before. But just knowing their history in a sense, it kind of like feels very pointed. And looking at the last line of, or the last paragraph stanza of the song, you can only see how there's also kind of like saying that coming from oneself that you made smaller to becoming this person who is a lot sharper now, is being able to like throw out the sharper version of yourself out there. And you're riding an express train headed to the top. And this time, even if you're on reset, then at least you're on that particular track, something like that. Again, this song contains so much raw emotion in a sense, I would say. And I think like part of it is they, in the credits, like it's not credited as to which of the members completely contributed to the song, because again, they're just listed as co-writers for this. But it just speaks so much to, I don't know, like to me, it felt like the closure that I needed from a previous chapter of theirs. Because even if they didn't really say anything too much into the situation, it was like reading into part of the perspective of the person who was sharing it, like what happened or what they're feeling at the moment, and what led to certain decisions that made them want to reset all over again. And it's such a pointed song, again dressed in this very just vibey, interesting experimental track that plays into, again, the reversed backtrack of God Eye. And again, it's those kind of like contrasting elements of it being a reversal of this other song, but the message remains similarly, or kind of like meshes into the narrative of that other song that it referenced to. I know it's just so brilliant. I've like shows produced songs, even if they're not exactly the most palatable, I would say, like compared to like other songs that Jin and Kishi are producing, they're usually the most experimental ones in the track, and I understand why he usually has the least number of produced songs in each of the releases, is because these types of concepts and ideas are just so, they're very soul bearing, but at the same time, like there's a lot of play around happening in them, and it's just so interesting, like being able to have a glimpse of what goes on into his producer brain just by listening to the track that he's producing. And obviously like with Jin and Kishi also like adding into this to make these songs alive, it's just so crazy. And again, the more it's a song that when you listen to it, it's not gonna make you as emotional as if you're listening to a ballad, but diving deep into the lyrics of it and kind of like just absorbing through that more and more if you listen to it, it's a type of song that you hope that you just never looked up the lyrics to, I would say. But yeah, it's a song that has so much depth, but at the same time so much straightforwardness to it, and it's just interesting to me. And again, this is like biases aside of me being a shotan and a show producing it, but just on a general level, like looking at it and being a fan of them for like even in the previous years or so, and just knowing that kind of history, there's so much to unpack in this song. And I know, but just generally it is an interesting track, and it's again something that is not that easy to consume, in a sense, like if you're into just very natural vibey music, but there's so many layers here in terms of just the creativity that went into this particular track. So yeah. Now, moving on to Frisco. This is another Jin produced track. I looked up what the meaning of Frisco is because I also wasn't aware. Like, I thought it was just kind of like this term that, like, I don't know, just something that you call San Francisco when you're being lazy or something. Like, honestly, that's my, like, I didn't know like what it is. So I looked it up, and apparently another one of its meanings is being a free man. So the lyrics made a lot more sense when I looked up that particular meaning. So when they say I'm a Frisco over and over in the chorus and throughout the song, it makes a lot more sense, especially since the song talks more about being confident and being able to pave your way into this new thing that you're going, and with your music, and being able to be more braggy about it and saying, you know, I'm confident that this is my thing, this is my music that I'm presenting to the world, and stuff like that. And it's a very number I coded song, I would say. Like, they've always been very forward and bold in saying that this is who we are as artists. We're not afraid to kind of like present ourselves in this particular way. This is something, this is our sound. This is, if iDog was kind of like repressed type of feelings that goes beneath, you know, the aggressiveness and boldness of this group, Frisco is kind of like the answer to that, where this is them bragging their identity now, and their music and who they are and their identity as artists who produce these songs, and taking pride of just who they are as a group. And it's just an overall chill kind of like vibey song. Now, relating to the rhythm of it, it's quite interesting because it's so clear that Jin produced this song. Because if I hear it, I would think that it's either Jin or Sho produced this song, given the 80s to 90s kind of like retro hip-hop type of inspiration in terms of just how it sounds. And it's usually between the two of them that play around with this type of music. But with Jin, you know, obviously he's very much into these types of more retro sounding tracks. It kind of like aligns so much with his style. It feels kind of like a sister or a brother to Inazuma, with Inazuma being more of like that band version of it, and this one leans more on like hip hop, but they're kind of like within the same time frame, retro time frame. So yeah, it's very Jin. I didn't know what to think about this song at first, but the more that I listen to it, the more it grows on me, simply because, again, it has a very nostalgic feel to it, rhythm-wise, from the songs that I listened to back when I was younger. And again, we're all within that same kind of like 90s age range, and I think that's a reason why. But it just reminds me so much of those kind of like hip-hop-ish R&B tracks that I listened to during that time frame, even jumping into the early 2000s, where it's not about, you know, very explicit stuff, but mostly about braggy, self-confident, aspirational lyrics, which I think I've discussed in previous videos as well, talking about their songs. But yeah, so that's what Frisco felt like to me, and it's very straight up with its lyrics as well. Like, it's not hard to miss what the song is about. And then lastly, not really last on the track list of the EP, but last song that I haven't discussed yet is Psycho. Now, this is another Kishi produced track, and I just have to say, Kishi has the most palatable produced songs out of everyone. It's so easy. Like, his produced songs are so easy to become fan favorites and just favorites in general, because I don't know, it has such like, it's still unique, but it has this like commercial quality, and I'm not using that term in a bad way. There's just something about it that's just so easy to consume. Like, for example, his past ones, Ice, No Yes, all these other songs are just so easy to like because there's really not a lot of complexity in terms of just a rhythm or anything like that. They're very familiar, like they're very familiar in a sense, so it's a lot easier for someone to kind of like get into, but at the same time, like they're still very number I in a sense. You know, it's not something that melts into whatever is just out there. So yeah, so there's a sense of commerciality in them in terms of how familiar they sound or how easy it is to absorb them as tracks, but it still retains the number I identity in terms of lyricism or the way that they deliver, you know, their kind of like how they hit those notes and kind of like rap and all these other things. Because for me, when I first listened to Psycho, and I think this was the first one that they released um in terms of like the tracks on when they played it on the radio, I was immediately hooked by it the first two lines that I heard it. And that's how easy it is to mesh into the worldview of the song. And overall, it's just such a performance centric type of song. Like when you listen to it, you immediately imagine like what it would be like to be performed. And it's just so easy to just, I don't know, just get into it. I think that's the best way that I can really just describe this song. And it's just so easy to see that that's Kishi's kind of like producer style. Um, and I've talked about this before, like with Kishi, again, these are songs that can shift in genres, but they are very, very easy to just absorb and just get into as a listener, whether or not you're a fan of Number I. Jin, he plays into genre shifts very well and plays into different inspirations, mostly retro, because that's his style. Um, and he usually plays into the vocal strengths of Kishi and Sho as well, which usually sometimes it's like singing or whether it's rapping or anything. Like Jin is really good in terms of drawing that out from his productions. And then with Sho is usually the ones that are more kind of like the unique number I identity. Like there's something very strong about his productions in a sense that is something that is solely number I, and that makes their discography really, really interesting because there's layers to it. Like you enter from one point and then the deeper you go into it, the more you see or go into the number I worldview of what they're trying to come across. But even then, there's a sense of cohesion in the messaging of the songs while still being diverse in terms of the genres because of the different styles of the members seeping through their produced songs. And overall, like again, Psycho, I just love vibing to that song. And again, I'm just looking forward as to how they're performing that song in their upcoming concert, I would say. I feel like it's just gonna be so good. It's such a good kind of like dance song, but it's just something that's also good to vibe to. Because there are some songs where you prefer to see it live because it's better performed than to listen to. Like for example, my sample of that would be OK Complex. Like OK Complex is a song that is very performance centric, but listening to it as a track, especially if you watch it already, like how it's performed, it's a lot easier to enjoy when you watch it than when you listen to it alone. But for Psycho, it has a good balance of both. And yeah, it's just such a good track. It's definitely my favorite track in this entire EP, I would say. Just in terms of listenability. But yeah. So yeah, those are my thoughts about these. I am waiting for my physical copies to arrive, so I'll make a separate video about those once those arrive. But I am just really psyched about this new release. I'm always psyched for like new music from Number I. I'm looking forward to like another album so that we just have more tracks. I don't know, but I'm just really really happy about this release. There's so many layers to this in terms of lyricism, rhythm, and just the overall direction. And it's just so interesting how they keep evolving in terms of just how they produce their songs and how it meshes with their entire discography so far. And I'm really looking forward. I really hope that in their like future releases there will be more genres to explore, like purely ballads or more pop sounding music or stuff like that. But I feel like right now the focus of their music is really leaning more towards R&B, hip hop type of thing, which I can't fault them for because I think that they really excel in that. But yeah, I'm just really hoping for a little bit more diversity in the future, just to play around with things. And I think a good opportunity would be, you know, in an album where there are more tracks similar to what they did with number one before. So yeah, but overall, really happy about this release. Let's talk it out down in the comments below as usual. Like, what are your thoughts? What are your favorite songs from this release? All of those other stuff and any other interpretations in terms of any of the songs I mentioned. Really just looking forward to what you think of it. But yeah, with that said, so if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new to my channel and you would want to hear more from me, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon in a new one. Bye!